Alright, now that you've been introduced to our waste unit and you're starting to think about waste and recycling, let's talk about how we dispose of our waste, the waste disposal methods. How do we take it from our homes and put it back into nature? The number one way is through sanitary landfills. Alright, that's the number one way of dealing with our waste in this country. What I'm going to ask you to do is remember back to the EPA hierarchy and the Pollution Prevention Act of 1994, and the EPA laid out a series of things to do with our waste, and the first one was to reduce. Right, that's the best thing we could possibly do. The next was to recycle and reuse, and then the third one down would be to treat our waste, and the last thing, the least desired, be disposal. All right, and disposal, what we do is landfills. All right, that's how we get rid of our waste. We'll talk about incinerators and waste-to-energy plants as a way to treat our waste. But just remember that hierarchy. The best things we can do would be to reduce, reuse, and recycle, and then to treat the waste, and this is how we treat it. The last case scenario would be to put it into landfills, which is the most popular and most used choice, but least preferred. Okay, so remember that hierarchy as laid out by the Pollution Prevention Act of 1994 by the EPA. Alright, so let's take a look at some waste disposal methods, the landfills. Alright, landfills are kind of easy to understand. Alright, we're going to dig a hole and we're going to fill the land with our waste. Alright, so that refuse is compacted and then covered every day with a layer of soil. Alright, so soil actually takes up as much as 20% of landfill space. But since 1994, all operating landfills in the United States are now required to control the amount of toxins and hazardous substances on their sites, in their landfills. So this is all in response to the 1994 Pollution Prevention Act. Historically, landfills are relatively new technology. It's only been since the 1950s and 60s that these landfills have been engineered the way that they are today. So we're talking about a relatively new technology, and you're going to see the consequences of that. But sanitary landfills really had their birth in World War II when soldiers were overseas and they didn't really want to give their positions away. What they would do is normally burn the trash, but on these islands and where they didn't want to give their positions away, they didn't want to burn the trash because the smoke would easily be seen by the enemy. So what they did was they developed these landfills. They would dig a depression in the ground, put their waste in it, and quickly cover it to not only get rid of it, but also to not attract the animals or give away their positions. So it was a way of dealing with trash in World War II overseas, and people started seeing, wow, this isn't too bad, and they brought this idea home. So it's kind of an interesting history about this type of solution for our waste. But historically, they're convenient, they're cheap and inexpensive, and they work. But we have one big problem with landfill, and it's what's called siting. Nobody wants to be near a landfill. So finding places to site these things, literally put a landfill, is a big problem. Nobody wants to be near them, but siting is a big problem that you need to know about when it comes to landfills. And another problem is that they're starting to fill up pretty quickly. Like I said, they've only been around since about the 1950s and 60s, post-World War II, and those first generation of landfills are reaching capacity and they're closing. So now we're faced with this siting problem. All right, we have to build new ones, and that siting problem comes back to play. But monitoring and making sure that those older landfills, when technology wasn't as good as today, they're starting to leak, and we're having groundwater contamination problems and some other problems with that first generation of landfills. Pretty easy technology to understand. This is a nice little general overview of what a landfill is and how it works. You're literally going to create a depression in the ground, and what you're going to do is put it in a place where it's away from groundwater, somewhere where there's naturally clay-rich soil and a deep groundwater table. So you create that depression, you're going to bring your trash in, you're going to compact that trash, layer it with soil, and you're going to continue to do that until your hole is filled. All right, that's the basics. There's a little bit more to it, a little bit more engineering to it, but that's the basics. We're literally filling a hole with waste and layering it with soil. And the intention is to take that waste and prevent it from ever harming people or the environment. Let's just store it and keep it somewhere and prevent it from harm to the environment. All right, and then after we're finished, we'll cap and we'll reclaim that site and then monitor it for the foreseeable future. All right, so here's some pictures. We literally bring in loads and loads of trash, and that trash can come in different shapes and sizes. It can be compacted trash from a trash truck. It can be in the form of tractor trailer loads. But what they're going to do is they're going to take that trash after it's been dumped, and they're going to spread it out in a as thin as possible, a thin layer, and then layer it with soil. So here they are spreading out that waste, and then they're going to layer it with soil. Take a look here. Here's an overview of a picture of a landfill, and I like this picture for two reasons. It shows a portion of this landfill, and I'll circle it here. A portion of this landfill has been closed. It's been capped and reclaimed. So under that hill is a closed landfill. They've capped it, and then they've put soil on it and actually planted grass, and they're now monitoring the site. But over here you can see this area over here is still actively accepting waste. So this is both a closed landfill, and a portion of it is still fully functional in operation. And in the back of this picture here you see these ponds. Right, these are our leachate ponds. Any water that's within a landfill that touches waste and becomes toxic, we need to pump that water out of the landfill, and these are leachate ponds where we're going to store that waste, store that liquid leachate until it can be treated as hazardous waste. Okay, so this is a nice overview picture of what a landfill might look like if you can fly overhead. Alright, here's a landfill in Pennsylvania. This one is up near Easton, the Schrin landfill. It looks very different than it does in this picture. It looks different today. You might pass it on the way to New Jersey. It's just off Route 78. But here you go. This is what a man-made mountain of trash would look like as you pass by it on the highway. Alright, if you grew up in this area, most of your waste is in this landfill. This one is nearby Pottstown, and the road on the right there is Route 422. This landfill is now closed. However, while you were growing up, this is where most of your waste went. So if you take a look here, it's a pretty big site. Off to the left here you see some of those leachate ponds where the leachate is collected. But if you grew up in this area, some of your diapers are still here, and they will be here for a long, long time. Alright, landfills in Pennsylvania. Take a look here at the locations of the cited landfills in Pennsylvania, and you might notice something right off the bat. You notice that most are in the southeastern portion of the state, and then another big portion of them are in the southwestern part of the state. Alright, and that's because we site the landfills as close to the source of the waste as possible to reduce the cost of transporting that trash. So siting is usually done in major population areas. You'll very rarely see siting of landfills out in the middle of nowhere. And you do see some out in the middle of nowhere, and those are the ones that are servicing a large amount of the population that lives in those rural areas. However, we do want to build these things where the people are, but that again puts stress on the siting problem. People do not want to be near these things, but we need these things to be near people. Alright, let's take a little bit of detailed look at the anatomy of a landfill. And you can come back to this slide and pause it here later. I just want you to see that there's a couple of component parts to this. It's a little bit more than just a hole filled with trash. Alright, so let's go through this together. Here we go. What we've done is we've created a depression, and we're going to put down a plastic liner. All right, and that's what they're laying out right now in this picture. That plastic liner is very thick. It's placed on top of a layer of clay, and that clay is compacted and forms an impermeable barrier. Clay naturally has this plate-like structure to it, as opposed to sand or gravel that's more round. So the clay, especially when compacted, you can compact this to form this impermeable barrier. And then if we layer it with a thick, very strong plastic liner, what we're doing is creating this double barrier that becomes very impermeable. So any trash, any water, any toxins that leach down to the bottom of the landfill are going to be trapped there, and we're later going to pump them out. Okay, here's another shot of them laying out the liner. Alright, the second part of the anatomy are those leachate pipes. Alright, and you can see the pipes being laid down at the bottom of the liner, and what they're going to do is they're going to add gravel to secure the pipes in place, so as weight gets piled up on top of them, those pipes stay in place, they don't shift. But those pipes are designed as water filters down through the garbage, through the toxins, and collects at the bottom of the liner. These pipes are going to take that leachate out of the system. Okay, we can't have those toxic liquids, we can't have those inside the landfill. So any water that trickles down through and touches garbage and has become toxic we call leachate, and we need to pump that out. So the leachate pipes become a very important part of the anatomy of a landfill. Alright, and here you go, here's another picture looking at those leachate pipes being installed, the liner being laid out. Okay, and then very simply we're going to add trash. So we spread that out, we compact it, and then we're going to layer each layer of trash with soil, and that prevents the smell. It prevents animals from coming in and moving the garbage around. So that layer of soil is there to stabilize things. It prevents litter, but it also prevents the smell and prevents animals. Alright, here we're going to continue to bring the trash. Take a look at the wheels. You see that specialized equipment here to move around and spread this around and compact the trash and then add the soil. Alright, just more trash. So you're getting the point. Alright, and you can pause this if you like and play my game here. You can try and find three things. The first thing to find is the flower. And then the second thing, see if you can find the apple. And then the third thing to find in our landfill would be the coffee mug. Alright, continuing along with the anatomy of the landfill. After we've filled our landfill for about 60 years, it is now full, and we need to cap that landfill. Alright, we're not just going to add soil and leave it go, because that allows water to filter down through the system, and we don't want that. We want to keep water and air out of this system. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the landfill cap on. And if you notice, it looks similar to the liner, and that's because it is. So we're going to layer a thick layer of plastic down, and the goal is to make the world's most giant trash bag possible. And the goal is to prevent any type of water getting into that landfill, because water causes decomposition and it forms leachate. And leachate is the biggest problem within landfills. So we're going to create this cap to prevent water and air getting in. Most people think that a landfill is built so that things decompose. It's very much the opposite. Landfill is built to preserve the waste, right? To contain it and to preserve it so that there is no decomposition, because when you have decomposition and you have water getting in there, you have the generation of things like leachate, and you have the generation of things like methane and things like that. So our goal is to take all the air and water out of this system and to literally just keep this waste preserved without air and water forever. That's the goal. But there is a problem. The problem is that liquids have already gotten into the system for the 60 plus years that the landfill has been in operation. Alright, those liquids, that leachate, will keep the landfill decomposing for about 30 years after it's been capped. But after 30 years, that will stop. There'll be no more decomposition. Old diapers won't decompose. Materials will remain for as long as we can imagine. And what's interesting is that garbologists, there are archaeologists called garbologists. Many colleges and universities do archaeology studies, and there are these garbologists that they use landfills. They'll drill down through and find newspapers that come up with the garbage, and they'll be able to read those newspapers. And in fact, if they find an artifact like an old shoe or some type of artifact and that doesn't have a date on it, what they'll do is they'll try and find a newspaper that's been nearby that shoe, real far deep down in the landfill, and they'll read the date on the newspaper, and then they'll be able to date the shoe. Right, they call that association. This is what a landfill looks like after it's been capped. This is the final product. They've planted grass on here, so we literally have a man-made trash mountain. But what you don't see is decomposition by anaerobic digestion of microbes creates methane gas. All right, so inside this landfill, for 30 years after it's been capped, there'll still be decomposition. And in that process, there's methane released. All right, methane is CH4, is being released for about 30 years after it's been capped. And we don't want that bubbling up into the atmosphere because CH4 is a greenhouse gas. And it's actually about 23 times stronger of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So it's a very important greenhouse gas. And now that we know what we know about global warming, we don't want this methane gas getting into the atmosphere, so we need to collect it. We need to capture it. So what we're going to do is we're going to install methane collection pipes, and bear with my drawing here. What we're collecting is methane gas. It's natural gas. So we can burn it to generate electricity. So many landfills are hooked up with methane power plants and can use that methane for about 30 years to generate electricity. So it's a very interesting positive side of the methane collection, this natural decomposition, that we can collect it and generate electricity. We used to let that methane go right into the atmosphere, but now with new knowledge about global warming, we now know that we need to capture it. All right. The last part of this system after it's been capped is that you need to drill monitoring wells all around this site to monitor any leaking of leachate. So if we have monitoring wells in places all around this site, in the woods, in this picture, all around this site, to monitor the groundwater table and make sure that leaching of leachate does not occur. We don't want contamination of the groundwater. Alright, so we end up with a very sophisticated and delicately engineered system to keep the trash and the pollutants contained for a very long time. Alright, so here you go. This is the cross-section of the anatomy of a sanitary landfill, and you can pause this if you like. This I found in a newspaper. You can read this if you like. It talks about the Schrin Brothers sanitary landfill near Easton off of Route 78. And several months ago, this was written I think in 2014, the cap on the landfill shifted and tons of mud and grass exposing liquefied garbage, necessitating the closing of a road, which caused a big problem. So that's just something I found in the newspaper.